Hey folks, we are here at GitLab Commit. I'm talking to Eddie. Sorry, you just told me how to say your name. Zaneski from DigitalOcean. And we were just talking about Ruby Rogues. It was kind of fun. But have you given your talk yet, or you're giving it later today? I don't remember.
I did. I gave one of the live coding keynotes.
Okay, good deal. And you were talking about CI/CD with Kubernetes and GitLab, right?
Correct.
Are you a React developer who builds large applications for your organization? With NX, you can build your apps in a monorepo alongside your backend code and share code between React and other frameworks. You'll also get advanced code generation and automatically configured tooling like Cypress, Jest, and Prettier to simplify your workload. You'll build higher quality apps, share more across teams, and focus less time on configuration. Visit nx.dev/react to get Narwhal's free open source set of extensible dev tools.
Do you want to just kind of give us the 5-minute elevator pitch for your talk?
Yeah, sure. So I'm far from a CI/CD expert, just like not at all. I've used it a bunch for some open source projects. And so by, diving into GitLab, they're one of our big partners in our marketplace, right? So I've been using it a bit more, playing with pipelines a bit more. And, in preparation for this talk, the big hot take that I have and takeaway is that like CI/CD is really just a bunch of janky shell scripts that are like grouped together really nicely.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah. And so I was talking to Sid last night at dinner, and I told him this, and I expected him to argue with me, but he mostly agreed. And he told me that the Auto DevOps is GitLab's solution to try to push that forward, right? So Auto DevOps is a collection of best practices for CI/CD manifests. It basically will take your application. You don't even have to know what Docker is. It'll build into a container for you as long as you follow some basic standards. It will do scanning on it for your dependencies, vulnerabilities, open source license, all that jazz. Ship that off to a Kubernetes cluster that you configure. Set up DNS, TLS, rotate out your certificates, take care of everything, and then do performance testing. And Sid said that they're working on load testing afterwards as well, right? So that's Auto DevOps in a nutshell. And so my talk was basically deploying a fake startup that I came up with called screamingchicken.club. It used Auto DevOps. And so it basically, went through the whole pipeline of starting with an application, building it into the container and shipping it up to Kubernetes. So
that's awesome. That's definitely something that I need to look into for two reasons. One is that I'm going to be doing a podcast episode on containerizing a Rails app. I'm going to be doing it live. So yeah, I have to prepare for it, obviously, but I'm going to be doing it live at Microsoft Ignite as a podcast episode. So I'm probably just going to talk about it, do kind of what we're doing here. But we're also working on a system to help manage the podcasts. And it's all written in Ruby on Rails. And so I'd like to get it to the point where we have some CI/CD pipeline. Currently, we're using Cloud 66. And so the deploy is easy, but it deploys to a VPS, and I have to make sure that all the packages get updated regularly, and it's a manual process. And so, I'd love to just figure out how to get that going. Now, one thing that I'm curious about is the Auto DevOps a feature that is available to me if I'm not paying for GitLab?
Yeah, it's completely free for open source projects. Even the in-project container registry is free. So I don't know how many layers and versions of your app they keep, but they were all there from all my test and trial runs. I think it's like 10 or 12 features. Some of them are paid for with a private repo. So mostly entirely all free for open source, and a bunch of free features for private repos too.
Good deal. Yeah, mine's under a private repo, so we'd have to figure that out. But I'm loving the idea of just doing a push and then having it all checked out. So it pushed Kubernetes. I'm assuming that was the Kubernetes setup on DigitalOcean.
Yeah, so you can use any Kubernetes cluster. The GitLab has a GKE OAuth feature built right in, so it's like a one-click. You can create a GKE cluster or pick one from a list.
That's Google's, right?
Yeah, that's Google's. GCP's, Google Cloud Platform's Kubernetes engine. And so I believe that GitLab's working on adding other cloud providers to that. I think DigitalOcean's one of them. I know there's an issue for it somewhere. But I used a DigitalOcean managed Kubernetes a cluster, and it's real simple to import them. You just have to grab like the API URL of the Kube API server, the CA cert for your cluster, and then you have to create a service account, bind that to a cluster role binding of cluster admin, grab the service token, right? So it's easy, but it's like a bunch of like manual stuff. I actually wound up writing a kube control plugin that automates all of that for you. And so I open source that. And so you just run kube control GitLab bootstrap, give it the project ID from your GitLab project, and it will set everything up for you. And GitLab is working on building out API support for installing Helm and Tiller and a bunch of other cool applications they provide. So basically this plugin will take care of everything eventually.
That makes sense. I guess one other thing that I'm running into with this app is that the original developer, I have no idea who that was, kind of didn't do a lot of testing. And I'm feeling a little bit guilty about that now because I really want to do CI/CD, but I don't want to deploy things that are going to break things, if that makes sense. And we've been running into issues too. I have another developer working on things now, and yeah, he puts in a new feature, and then my team goes, "Oh, it's broken," right? So, is there a process that you like for kind of easing into this so that it's not so painful if you have some of these issues?
Yeah. So the nice thing about Auto DevOps, and I focused on this in my talk, is that you don't have to use all 12 of those features. They're all templated out. So the best part about GitLab is that it's open source, obviously, right? And so all of those features are, you can look at the code, and it is just one big CI/CD manifest of YAML and janky shell scripts that got put together. Right. But like I didn't have to write it, and someone who knows way more than I do about CI/CDs who wrote it, right? So it inherently,
and they're paying people to bang on it.
Exactly, right? So in my talk I pulled out the build one and the deploy one. And so you can skip the test one, right? And so the build one will use Heroku-ish build packs. I think the test one does too. And so that'll detect, the app and the language and all that stuff you're using, generate you a Docker file if you don't have one. But yeah, so because it's composable, you can just pull in those, 2 templates that you want to work with and not worry about any of those stuff that's going to like fail or break.
That makes sense. I guess the other thing that I'm running into is that, yeah, we're starting to break things up into services, right? So with the podcast app, for example, we have the kind of the main, I don't know, the mothership app, I guess. And then we have another app that just does the download tracking, right? And we're probably going to wind up with maybe 1 or 2 others that manage other aspects. And so I guess I can just have Docker files for each of those and just have them all spin up. Is that kind of the idea?
So you can turn all that into Docker files, or you can let Heroku-ish figure that out for you. Docker Compose is a good way to take care of that. Shout out to Michael Herman from Test-Driven.io. He's got a really great blog post about doing all of this with GitLab, DigitalOcean's Kubernetes, and Docker Compose. So he builds like 3 different containers all in one pipeline and like test them all. It's a really cool blog post. So check that out.
So for multiple services.
Multiple services, right. So yeah, so Docker Compose makes that really easy. And so you can, with your builds, you can break all of your steps out into different jobs or stages, whatever you want to call them. And then they can depend on each other, rely on each other, run in parallel. And so you can either test them all independently in one pipeline, separate pipelines. Yeah, it's all super configurable. And then, so question for you though, actually, so you say all these different services, are you using like Rails as like a microservice for all this stuff?
So the mothership app is Rails, and then the tracking app is Sinatra with, it's backed onto Sidekick. And so, yeah, so essentially then for the one, the request comes in, it tracks essentially the download for the media, and then it hands it off to Sidekick to make sure that it's not a duplicate request and things like that. And then it just redirects them on to wherever it's being hosted.
That's awesome. The reason I ask is, I've been detached from the Rails and the Ruby world for a handful of years now. I really got involved with Node and Go very recently. And so seeing people talk about like Rails microservices has just been like, wait, what? Like, when did that happen? So I think a lot of people are really embracing that, huh?
Yeah, I don't see so many people using Rails for microservices. Usually I see something a little more lightweight like Rhoda or Sinatra or something like that, or just straight up Rack. But Yeah, or you'll see something like Node, or sometimes people reach for that because they can essentially drop it into a Lambda function and then watch it run. Ruby on Jets is another option for serverless, and so yeah, you've got some options there. But yeah, I've been playing with all kinds of different things, and initially I wanted to build it in a sort of Lambda function type setup, and because then I could just have it hit and then it would just run the function, and then when that function completed, it would just call the other function to do the deduplication, and I would just pay for whatever Lambda wound up using. But it turned out to be simpler to do it this other way because I'd already done it before.
That's awesome. I know Shopify is big on microservices and Rails. I've talked to them a lot at KubeCons. So, okay, cool. And then I like you're talking like the simple function calling approach and the callbacks. And I think it's Michael Parham, right? Author of Sidekick. He wrote a blog post a couple of years ago. I don't know if you've seen it, where he talked about his Stripe payment portal, and he just used like CGI on his server with a Ruby script. It's such a good blog post. It's probably like 6 or 7 years old at this point, but he just had such a simple job. And he's like, you know what I did? I wrote a single Ruby shell bash script, and I have CGI call it. And he's like, it takes care of everything for me. Like this, this simple interface of calling a function, that we had as CGI, we're now using as Lambdas and other stuff. So
very cool. So what are your responsibilities at DigitalOcean? Are you an evangelist? Are you a developer, or architect, or have you moved into like marketing or what?
Yeah. So DevRel sits under marketing at DigitalOcean, which does at many places. I serve as a service leader to the developer evangelist team at DigitalOcean. So I've got a team of a couple evangelists, and we are, working with the community. DigitalOcean's got a couple great values that I really like. The most important of which to me is our community is bigger than ourselves, right? So everything we do is just like really focused on the community. We try to give back. We sponsored a bunch of language conferences this year, right? So it was at GopherCon, PyCon, RailsCon last year. And, we have a badge scanner, and like, we don't really use it, right? Like, I don't want to scan people's badge. I don't want to give them an ID. Like, we are literally there just to give back to the community and interact. So
that's awesome. So you wind up talking at conferences like this too, I assume, as part of your job. What should people know about DigitalOcean? I mean, in this context, you do have Kubernetes clusters it's a fairly recent thing, but yeah, you can do Kubernetes there. I've hosted servers there for a long time. I actually need to go clean some stuff up over there because I have a bunch of servers running that I don't need anymore. But yeah, if people need to know maybe one or two things about DigitalOcean as far as what you do and how you do it, what should they know?
So I was at HashiConf last week, and the Microsoft Azure open source team gave a demo keynote about a cool tool they built called Porter. It kind of like orchestrates calling like Terraform and a bunch of other stuff. Right. And they did the demo with DigitalOcean's Kubernetes service. And people were like, why are they using that over, AKS or something, right? So obviously they wanted to be like, show they're platform agnostic, really not make it like a marketing or product pitch. And they went and they chose DigitalOcean to use as their demo. And, we were talking to them afterwards, and they're like, yeah, we probably, couldn't do it on Amazon, but like, you guys are like the Switzerland of cloud providers. And I think that's really, what people can know about us is that we're definitely viewed as like a, independent third party out there, not tied to like any other big companies. And we focus on open source technology. So everything we do is fully invested in open source, right? Like our Kubernetes product, it's vanilla Kubernetes, right? It passes 100% conformance testing, and it's our cloud controller manager, which is like the component that, lets us be DigitalOcean's cloud Kubernetes. That's all open source too. Same with our CSI, which is our container storage driver. All of that's open source, right? So everything we do is like really tried to open source. We invest in it. And then we focus on the building blocks. So our droplets, our servers have been around for a while, right? We were basically like a one product company for many years. And so now that we have a solid foundation, we're starting to build on top of our building blocks, right? So managed Kubernetes is actually just built on droplets. It creates droplets under the hood with a different image. Our managed database platform is the same thing. That's built on top of our droplets. So
nice. Now I'm assuming they recorded the talks and people will be able to watch it. If people want to go check you out after they watch the talk, or they're thinking, oh, this looks really cool, what else is going on over there? Where do they follow you, and how do they see what you're working on or thinking about these days?
Yeah, so I am at Eddie Zane. That's EDDIEZANE on the internet. So GitLab, GitHub, Twitter's, email, eddiezane at digitalocean.com. So pretty much you can search that and find me everywhere.
Good deal. Well, I personally can just kind of attest to, DigitalOcean always taking good care of me when I had issues. And I don't even think they knew who I was a lot of the time when I reached out. It was just, oh, okay, it's another customer that needs help, and I got help fast, got help the right way. And the other thing is like their documentation / blog posts are awesome. So if you're trying to figure out how to set up pretty much anything on a server, you don't even have to do it on DigitalOcean, but you can go walk through their tutorials on how to do that stuff. And that's terrific stuff too. And I've talked to Brian Hogan a few times, and he's kind of, runs a lot of that stuff. But yeah, I can't say enough good things about DigitalOcean. I mean, just a great company, and they've always done right by me. So if you're looking at learning Kubernetes, and that's kind of the next thing on my list, then definitely go check them out. And that's just digitalocean.com. Is there anything else that people need to know in order to get started with DigitalOcean?
No, there's not. You can just sign up, free account, get some credit, hit the ground running. I do want to plug one thing. Have you heard of Hacktoberfest before? So Hacktoberfest is this is the 6th year we're running it. It's a giant open source hackathon throughout the month of October. And basically, if you make 4 pull requests to open source projects, you get a free T-shirt. So we've been running this in partnership with GitHub, Twilio, and Dev.to this year. And so, yeah, people should go participate in Hacktoberfest and get involved with some more open source projects and get some cool swag out of it.
Good deal. Yeah, I'll just plus one that. Who doesn't like free T-shirts, right? All right, well, thanks for coming and talking to me, Eddie.
This episode is sponsored by Sentry.io. Recently, I came across a great tool for tracking and monitoring problems in my apps. Then I asked them if they wanted to sponsor the show and allow me to share my experience with you. Sentry provides a terrific interface for keeping track of what's going on with my app. It also tracks releases so I can tell if what I deployed makes things better or worse. They give full stack traces and as much information as possible about the situation when the error occurred to help you track down the errors. Plus, one thing I love, you can customize the context provided by Sentry. So, if you're looking for specific information about the request, you can provide it. It automatically scrubs passwords and secure information, and you can customize the scrubbing as well. Finally, it has a user feedback system built in that you can use to get information from your users. Oh, and I also love that they support open source to the point where they actually open sourced Sentry if you want to self-host it. Use the code DevChat at Sentry.io to get 2 months free on Sentry's small plan. That's code DevChat at Sentry.io.
Hey, folks, we're here at GitLab Commit. This is the first conference that they put on, and it's here in Brooklyn. And I am talking to Shamiq. Shamiq. It's her fault. She said it funny. And yeah, anyway. Shamiq, and you work for Coinbase.
Yes, I do.
And you gave a talk earlier talking about security. Do you want to just kind of give us the elevator pitch for your talk, and then we can dive into some of the ideas behind it?
Yeah, sure thing. The core concept here is security historically has been a post-implementation process. Everybody's done, everybody's waiting. Now let's throw it through the security loop. What we found over, I guess, the last 50 years of doing this is that's super slow. And sometimes you just completely scratch what you were doing, have to restart because the security just wasn't there, or it's not tenable with what you want. So what are the technologies and techniques we can use to actually bring security much, much earlier into the development lifecycle? Like, how do we think about it just from ideation and initial delivery instead of waiting until we're just completely hosed?
So what do you do then? I mean, yeah, most of my experience has been, okay, we're done. Let's make sure nobody can get this stuff. Yeah. How do you figure that in?
Yeah, so there's like 2 different perspectives of it. One is like, as a security professional, what do I care about? What do I think about? The second is, as a developer, what do I care about, and how do I approach this problem? So we just went ahead and broke it out into like, decompose your problem, make it the simplest thing you can solve, and how do you actually solve that? What we did was started just providing our engineers and the developers on our team just the fundamentals of our threat model. right? Like, hey, regardless of what you're writing, if you're working on this type of product or this area, here are the things that can go wrong. Here's how we've seen them fail. Here's how we've generally fixed them. Here are the tools available to help you detect whether or not they are going to fail when you write code. So it's just like, when you're making your unit integration test, we almost make it like test-driven development at that point, right? It's like security test-driven development, things that shouldn't go wrong once everything else is working. Then we started working like much more on the ideation side, which is, okay, if that will address like common vulnerabilities as they happen, let's then go ahead and talk about like the architecture. How do you build something that isn't just completely like unsecurable? Right? Because at the end of the day, if it's unsecurable, we've kind of failed, right? If we have a securable output, we can make it work. It's just a matter of like, how much do we need to secure it before it's ready to go, or before it's fit for purpose?
So one thing that I'm curious about, because you're talking about, I guess, making a plan and knowing what kinds of things can go wrong with your security, and then baking that in. I'm not a security genius. So for me, it's like SQL injection and make sure they authenticate before they hit the API, and then I'm lost, right? So how do you know what some of these issues could be?
What's funny? It's like for 95% of the use cases, you've covered the two things you probably need to care about, right? So like, you may not be a genius, but it turns out you don't have to be a genius, right? It's great. And so this is part of, once we lay out, hey, so I'm at Coinbase. Coinbase is a digital currency exchange. You bring, US dollars, you get US dollar tokens and US dollar coins and whatnot, in addition to Bitcoin and what have you. So in that world, there's like two things we have to care about. Don't lose the money. Don't lose the user data. Right. And so once you like get the fact that, okay, the things that I do that touch money and user data are the things I need to highlight and focus on. Right. Next thing is you go up to your friendly security engineer, and they're probably like smiling like me and saying, hey, what are you working on? How can I help you? You're like, well, here's this huge architecture, and I'm doing all of these things, and here's the rough plan. And by the way, this is the data flow that touches the money. This is the data flow that touches the user data. These are the things that affect those user flows. What should we worry about? I've already taken care of like SQL injection, and here's how I'm doing authentication. And then just use that as the brainstorming part, right? Spend time together. We'll just flag like, hey, ABC buzzwords in security. And you're like, well, what the heck do these ABC buzzwords actually mean? Like, okay, let me go show you an example. Let me dive into this. Adjacent to this, like kind of as an independent process, we offer security training, right? So you're like, hey, I'm not just going to tell you and give you all these requirements. I'm going to actually help you meet them. Right. And that's by like, okay, you said SQL injection. This is what it actually looks like. This is how we commonly solve it. By the way, if you're not using an ORM, you're probably going to shoot yourself in the foot. And if you're doing raw SQL query construction, like you increase the risk as well. Doesn't mean it's like completely unsafe to do, but more likely than not, somebody's going to come by and make a mistake here. Let's find places where people make mistakes and just make it impossible to make a mistake.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I like the idea of ongoing training. I think that's one area too that, in addition to security, a lot of companies just fundamentally mess up. And by mess up, I mean don't do. And the reason is because, they get so focused on these developer skills, right? Do you know React? Do you know Rails? Do you know Node? Do you know Express? Do you know, right? And so then it's, okay, well, go watch videos on those things, right? Instead of, okay, well, we're doing security, but we're not thinking about training on security. We're working as a team, but we're not training on how to work as a team. And so I see a lot of these gaps in the education that people get, and it really just boils down to these blind spots where it's like, well, you have to learn the latest version of React because we got to move to it. But you don't need to learn the latest security practices because they just don't think about it.
Yeah, one of the things to add here, it's like I do a little bit of hobby woodworking, right? Turns out a table saw, it's a box that has a blade that spins really fast. There's some instructional material about how to use a table saw, like, this is one kind of cut, here's another kind of cut, here are how things work. But also don't put your fingers in it, right? Like that's one of the first things that they tell you. It's like tuck away your clothing that might get caught. In my case, tuck away my beard in case I'm getting really close to the blade for whatever dumb reason. Right? Put your hair in a ponytail if it's going to be in the way, but don't intersect with the blade in a place that's going to hurt you. It just makes it very obvious this thing spins. Mm-hmm. Now, for many physical systems, it's a lot easier for like us human beings to identify that, you know what, that's a hot plate. It's probably going to hurt because I've touched a hot plate before and that hurt, right? That's a spinning knife. It's probably going to cut. I've touched a knife before and now we're just making it move faster. Unlike the technical side, like those metaphors and those analogies just aren't as good, right? Unless you've suffered the failure before, you may not know that this is a failure to care about. And unless you've seen somebody suffer, like you can go on YouTube and watch accidents. I don't necessarily recommend it unless you've got the stomach for it. But if you want to see like how things go wrong and what it looks like afterwards, you can go just look at it. Nobody's going to show you security failures. Right? They're not going to say, here's a security bug and here's like the walkthrough of it. And every once in a while when they do show up, everyone loves reading about it. Yeah. So like one thing that we added here, historically, like a bug bounty program is known as like a threat intelligence feed. Let these external attackers tell you what's going on in your infrastructure that you may not know about and use their kind of knowledge and skills to augment what you know. Well, we added like one additional field to our like internal tracking of these whenever we made like kind of the issues move over into our bug tracking system, which was what was the commit that created this, right? Oh, yeah. And then what did that give us? Well, one, it gave us the place where the mistake was made. We can understand kind of organizational context. Was a lot of change happening at that time? Was it super fast? Like, is this a thing we could have ever seen?
Is
right?
that a class of problem child?
Yeah. Is this a thing that does this problem happen in the software or does this problem happen with this person? Right. Because what we're identifying is instead of trying to boil the ocean and teach you everything, right? Give you that PhD course in security. Like here's all the things that can go bad in security at Coinbase, like to the specific lines of code. Why don't we just go find people who've had some of these failure cases, identify what they are? You know, if we realize that this is an easy to make mistake, use them and help them teach the rest of their team about how to do a better job going forward. Like, why waste an opportunity when it's just sitting right there in front of you? Like, that's the beauty of having a Git-based system. You know exactly what the code is.
So let's imagine for a minute that I don't have a security expert working for my company, right? And I'm aware now, oh, we're taking credit cards, so we might, we might want some security, or, we have some customer data that's proprietary that we want to protect or whatever, right? What's my first step? If I'm, number 2 or number 3 at the company and we don't have anybody who can come in and do the training and point these issues out and say, hey, do this, not that, don't do this, please do that, make sure you cover this, etc.
I've seen kind of the other perspective of it. Companies that haven't had any kind of security footprint, like they don't have a security specific team, and they're asking for help, and they're just saying like, what do we do?
Yeah.
Generally,
that's what I'm wondering.
Yeah. Generally, what happens? It's like they get referred to a security person through like a friend of a friend of a friend, right? Somewhere through the woodwork, somebody pops up and says, "Hey, Shamiq, can you go talk to this team? They need a little bit of help. They want to know what to think about, what to focus on." And, just kind of start with that. There's a bunch of material. If you're like particularly motivated, you want to be the security person, or that's your responsibility area, that depending on where you sit and where you land in the organization, like it has different amounts of relevance. One of the one of the first tools here that I always go to pick up is just threat modeling. And the simple definition of threat modeling is like, given what the thing is, what else could it possibly do, right? Where else can it go wrong? You may run out of creativity, and that's fine. Over time, that's experience, right? Your creativity comes from more exposure. But what you won't run out of is just like, you'll already have a list of things you care about. And just start asking that question to other people. It's like, hey, this is a wrench. What else can you do with the wrench? Well, it turns out this wrench you can throw really hard, right? If you can dodge a wrench, you can dodge a ball. And so how is somebody going to pick up this wrench and throw it at us?
No, that makes a ton of sense. One other area that I hear about with security is just dependencies, right? So, maybe it's not the code I wrote. Maybe it's the code that I'm pulling off of NPM or Ruby Gems or, I can't remember what the Python package manager is, but so yeah, you pull in somebody else's code because it makes it really easy for you to write your code, and then it turns out, hey, there's a vulnerability in here. They didn't put it in on purpose, but somebody found it and it's there, and I need to upgrade. It's NPM does a good job because it'll actually tell you, we know there's a vulnerability, you need to upgrade, right? Yeah. But some of the other ones don't. So how do I keep track of all of that for an app that I'm running?
That one's tricky. There's kind of two sets of concerns when I think about it as a security person. The first is we've seen a rash of dependency authors' individual credentials getting compromised. And then somebody takes that and just uploads a vulnerable version. Yep. So now you're doing the right thing of you're updating because there's a new version out, and you should update when there's a new version out. Turns out what you updated to specifically tries to steal or violate some principle of trust that you had established for your application. And there was one. It's both Ruby Gems and NPM have had recent examples, but this threat vector, software supply chain, has existed forever. Right. It's just with the whole, what was it, the Huawei servers coming out of some the microsystems or what have you. But the core there was if it's not in your control in any pipeline, at some point you are doing trust, or you're doing a lot of outside of house verification. I tell my developers, sanity check a couple things. Right. One, is it doing funky crypto? Right. Is it trying to find crypto keys? Is it trying to find your wallet keys for crypto related material, cryptocurrency in this case? Two, is it making servers or web requests where it doesn't make any sense for this thing to make servers or web requests? Because in our case, it's either tampering the data or it's stealing the data, exfiltrating the data. If you can hit a couple more of those sanity checks, depending on what you care about, you can probably kind of work through these libraries. Now you take something like _JS or one of these big kind of everything in the kitchen sink type packages. You're in a world of hurt trying to do any kind of validation verification there.
Very cool. So just kind of rewinding a little bit. When I asked you what your talk was about, specifically, it was about moving the security concerns further up in the pipeline, right? So you're thinking about them earlier. And that seems like more of a mindset thing. We've talked a lot about how to do security and how to think about security. But yeah, how do you make it that first class concern that comes in at the same time as, what framework we're going to use, or, how are we going to deploy this thing once we have anything to deploy?
A lot of that is about understanding your organizational perspective, right? What does the company have to care about? For most companies, there needs to be a product to secure, right? What are success criteria for that product? How do we know that we've hit what we actually wanted to ship? What is the core functionality that needs to exist? Right now, the rest of this is non-functional requirements. If we're speaking agile, it's given the core user story that we want to solve, what is the way we want to solve it? It's almost a little too easy at Coinbase because it's very, very easy for me to describe the problem area. Right. User data, user funds. Right. We lose either of those, we lose trust. Coinbase is built on trust, right? You wouldn't use a financial institution that you couldn't trust. And so in respect to that, it's super easy for me to go almost up and down the entire management chain, right? Because I'm not just talking to my developers about trust, right? I'm talking to the eng managers, the eng directors, the VPs. I'm talking to my PMs. And in fact, some of the highest leverage that we get are just PMs that are deeply concerned about how trustable their product is, right? They're pushing their eng teams to work with us. Right. I talk to execs and say, hey, you own this part of the company. What is your intersection with trust? What is an acceptable threshold here? Right. Where are we being efficient with our security work? Where are we kind of overspending? And just start breaking down the different pieces based off of how they fit to the individual person. Just talk to Brian, right? Brian's well, security is obvious. What is a major cause of failure for a cryptocurrency exchange? Well, they lose the money. Why do they lose the money? Generally because of some kind of security or operational gap. Well, let's not have security or operational gaps that cause our major competitors to fail. So it's what is the actual narrative for your company, for your environment? In certain cases, it's not clear, right? And you do tons and tons of digging, and you come out with the fact that there's like this huge multivariate function that's like, this person cares only about this small thing. This other person cares about this other thing. And now in order to put it together into like a cohesive story, right, we're just going every which way in terms of actually getting the message across. But if you're not doing that work, you're gonna have a hard time getting any kind of buy-in or uplift, right? If nobody cares about security whatsoever, you're just like, you're tilting at a windmill, right? You got to start with somebody who cares. And it might be you're the person who cares, and you ask these questions to spark that train of thought in somebody else. Like, you did this thing, it's cool. Is it secure enough? And you're looking at some software output that you have, and you're like, well, is it secure enough? What am I, okay, in that case, what do I actually care about if it's secure enough? And when do I know I've done a good job? Right? Just start establishing those parameters.
Yeah, that makes sense. And yeah, just knowing what you care about, I guess, and then securing that.
That's like absolutely the simplest thing. What do I care about? Right? When has this succeeded? Well, it can do X. I was like, well, what if it can do more than X? You're like, well, that'd be nice too. What if it can do this other thing that's well beyond X? In fact, it's like anti-X. You're like, well, actually, okay, that's not great. Let's go figure out what those boundary conditions are.
Gotcha. I really want to do an Adventures in DevOps episode and just have you dig into this with the rest of the panel. So I'll probably invite you back to that. But in the meantime, if people want to learn more about this, are there good resources out there? And if they want to follow you online, are there good places for them to do that?
Yeah, I don't have a great online presence. I'm mostly on LinkedIn, and even then I'm kind of thin on LinkedIn. Coinbase has an engineering blog, and our security team does upload kind of regularly about things that we find, things that we've run into. Most recent kind of big splash that we had was somebody used a 0 day, so like a previously unknown exploit in Firefox, specifically targeting our systems and our like engineering laptops. And so we were resilient to that, and that's a great story to read through as well. A lot of like the fundamentals of security, if we've got a bunch of like web application security people, Tangled Web is a book we recommend that hits a lot of like the core browser security functions. It's a little, and the other book that I like that's a little bit harder to read is just called Threat Modeling. It's written by Adam Shostak, who's literally like invented the field as far as anybody is concerned. And he lays out a lot of just the basic principles of how do you just approach this untenable problem of what can go wrong.
About You is one of the fastest growing e-commerce companies in Europe. Their headquarters is located in Hamburg, Germany. Currently, their fashion online shop is live in 10 European markets with more than 8 million app installs, 15 million active users on its platform, and handles more than 3 million API calls per day. In 2018, About You reached a company valuation of more than $1 billion, moving up to the exclusive circle of European unicorns. This could only be achieved by the excellent work of About You's tech teams. 1/3 of their employees are developers and come from over 40 different nations, which truly enriches the teamwork of the company. What they all have in common is that they are highly driven by the passion to develop the best product on the market. Their award-winning organizational model, Move, allows developers to switch teams, which ensures lifelong learning. About You has built its software in-house using Laravel, Node.js, TypeScript on the server side, and Vue.js and React on the client side, as well as some of the latest technologies like Flutter. Besides a variety of free drinks and fresh fruits, About You offers free language courses and helps new employees in the relocation process if they move from abroad. Moreover, developers get free tickets to the About You organized conference, the Code.Talks, one of the biggest tech conferences in Europe. The conference takes place in Hamburg and has more than 1,500 developers in attendance. Furthermore, About You offers a well-structured onboarding process with a buddy system and provides access to e-learning tools such as Laracasts.com and Egghead.io. When starting at About You, you get to pick your hardware. You can use a MacBook or Windows notebook and the kind of IDE you want to work with. Since the company is continuing to grow fast, About You is always on the hunt for new motivated team members. Currently, there are vacancies for full-stack developers, a front-end developer, Dart and Flutter developers, a quality assurance engineer, a project manager, and other exciting leadership positions. If this sounds good to you, apply now at aboutyou.com/jobs. They are looking forward to hearing from you.
Hey, folks, we are here at GitLab Commit, and we are talking to Jasmine James. And she spoke earlier about how Delta went cloud native, which is really cool stuff. Do you want to just kind of, before we recorded this, you kind of explained a little bit more. Do you want to just go into that, and then I can ask you a bunch of questions and we can see where we end up?
Sounds like a plan. Thank you so much. So today, the focus of my talk was Delta's cloud native journey and pretty much what sparked it. And as we walk through that journey, what are some of the key decisions that we made that allowed us to achieve workflow portability across multiple public clouds? So this stems from tooling selections to platform as a service selections, and also maintaining a great developer experience. So that's it in a gist.
Nice. So, yeah, what prompted this? Because I see a lot of these big companies, and some of them, yeah, they seem to be on all the clouds, and then some of them, it's like, we have a data center. Thank you very much. So yeah. So how do you balance that, and what prompted you to move?
Right. So I think that we knew that we had to do something in order to remain competitive and to achieve true business agility and have just the will to like just scale rapidly, because our customers, they want what they want. So by implementing cloud native concepts and moving into like Kubernetes containerization type strategies, this was like the natural next step, because first step was installing it on-prem, right? We had a data center, let's put a cluster there, get familiar with what this means. But then the use cases emerged of, okay, there are some workflows or workloads that we have to kind of have really, really large compute for. So do we buy the infrastructure, or do we leverage somebody that already has it for a short amount of time? So those use cases started to emerge. And we are partners with a lot of big vendors, Microsoft, a lot of them. So of course they were like, hey, we have a solution for you. So we didn't commit to anyone just yet, but I think that by selecting a platform as a service, we are enabled to kind of scale and put a cluster in an AWS, a GCP, or an Azure, and really be able to run our workloads there while not having to spend like capital on infrastructure and use it for a minimal amount of time. So that's what sparked it. And yeah, that's where we are.
Yeah, that makes sense. So yeah, you've got a lot of things running cloud native. One of the things that you talked about was just avoiding vendor lock-in, right? And in particular, I'm curious about this in two ways. One is yeah, how do you avoid writing things so that you can't move it off of AWS into Azure, out of Azure into Google Cloud Platform? So let's start there, and then I'll ask my other question in a minute.
Awesome, because I was scared I was going to have to remember both. So really what we're thinking about, so vendor lock, you can think about it in two ways. In a way, Delta, we are locked into a vendor. We've selected a platform as a service, which is OpenShift in our case. We leveraged RHEL heavily, so it was natural for us to go in that route. But avoiding the vendor lock on the public cloud space by having a platform as a service that we're installing and that we can scale to, we're not really tying into any one capability of the public cloud. So when you're leveraging like the orchestration capability on AWS or Azure, you're there and you have to stay. Your developers learn that one thing and that's it. But if you leverage your on-prem platform that's also in the cloud, it's the seamless experience. So that's how we've not like locked in per se. That being said, we are leveraging some of the features of the public cloud. So when you think about an AWS Lambda for serverless or function based workflows, then those are things we do plan on leveraging, but loosely. We're going to try to tie it into one platform so that it's still seamless and not really locked in all that heavily.
No, that makes a lot of sense. So you essentially manage infrastructure to provide infrastructure, and then you run everything on that, and that way it's all common, and then you can move it if you need to. The other question that I had is, yeah, a lot of people, they seem to adopt AWS. They go whole hog into all the things that they offer, or they go to Azure and they're whole hog into Azure or GCP or whatever, right? Oracle Cloud. And so they learn all those systems and they use them. And I guess I'm wondering, why not just build the expertise? Because having a deep expertise a lot of times is very valuable, as opposed to, knowing this system and that system and that system and the other system. So yeah, why spread your infrastructure out across the different clouds?
I think that historically, a lot of large organizations have done just that. If you think about the IBMs of the world, you buy everything IBM. And I think that we've learned our lesson from being tied to one vendor. You're really there for all time, and you're just subject to whatever the vendor, does or is going on. So I think that you kind of hedge your bets when you put like not all your eggs in one basket, to use that analogy, and you're just spreading it across. So especially with an organization like us, we have a lot of mission critical applications. So if there is ever an availability issue within the public cloud or just something's broken, right, it would be very, very impactful to our bottom line and our brand and things like that. So I think spreading that workload across and also having an on-prem as a backup is a great way to go because you're not really locked in and it's a lot less risk in a way. So yeah.
Yeah, I like that. When you went cloud native, what were some of the things that you ran into? Because I mean, the server model is pretty well understood, right? And I'm sure you had machines that had a lot of life left in them. So I understand some of the flexibility and some of the other reasons for doing it, but what did you run into as you made that transition?
I think the biggest thing, besides the obvious things, you gotta, one, containers is like, we're blowing developers' minds at Delta. We have a lot of legacy employees and, they're used to VMs, they're used to the monolithic application. So one, deconstructing your applications into microservice, that was kind of like a thing we had to do. And then I think the educational aspect has been one of the hardest things because there's so many different concepts to learn, 12-factor, all these different things you have to consider. And it's a lot at one time too. You're not only changing the infrastructure, you're changing the way you construct applications. So I think that we still have a challenge there with education and making sure that not only are teams using our platforms in the right way, but are you architecting your applications in a cloud native way to achieve like the value that we're looking for from going cloud native in the first place? So that's been our biggest challenge. And we're still, trying to solve that. We have an immersive educational program called the Dojo at Delta, where we bring development teams through and help enable them with all these new concepts, new tooling. It's a lot of new stuff. So we're just trying to figure out a way how to ease the pain of that transition. Yeah.
It's so interesting to me just that you're talking about the mental challenges, right? And just getting people to the point where they can conceive of how this all works and understand how it all goes together. It's such a metaphor for life, right? I can't even imagine having done that. I've been training for a marathon, for example, and one of my neighbors basically was like, that's so inspirational, and it's just because they can never picture themselves doing it, right? And it's the same thing here where we're talking about, okay, yeah, how do I think about this? How do I look at this? Because I'm so used to the way that it is, but you can't move forward with your old thinking. And so you have to get to that point. And it's hard. It's really hard, especially if you've been doing it for a really, really long time. So how far into this journey are you folks? Are you all the way there? Are you still working on it? I mean, yeah.
Not there yet by any means. I think we still have a long way to go. An engineer on my team and I just gave a talk this afternoon about our journey. And I think maybe like a year and a half ago, we were just piloting our first 3 applications. We've come a long way since then. I think we have about 90 applications in production now using their platform as a service that's on-prem. And we're also piloting 4 apps into the public cloud right now as well. But that's just a drop in a bucket compared to, what we have to get to from an application standpoint. And it's kind of like we don't know where we are in a way because there's so many monolithic applications at Delta that have to be deconstructed into microservice. It's kind of like, how do you measure how far you have to go if the applications haven't been, redefined into microservice architecture? So it's hard to measure, but the good thing is that we are moving forward and that we're making an impact to the development community at Delta. And we have, we're in good company with the community that we have here at GitLab. So I think we're on our way and I feel really good about it.
Are there any applications or aspects of applications that you're really kind of dreading having to move into microservices and then move into the cloud just because they're old or not well maintained or, not written in the way that makes them conducive to that kind of move or things like that?
So I'm an optimist. So no, they don't scare me. I think that, never back down from a challenge. And I think that we'll get there. Of course, we're taking the low hanging fruit first, right? Those are applications that are easy. They're big, but they're very modularized, right? But we will run into challenges, but I think it's just, we'll get there towards the end of our journey, but we'll get there, I think. So I'm optimistic about the future when it comes to all of our applications.
That makes sense. If the next time I book a ticket, it doesn't work, should I call you? I'm just kidding.
No, there's a number for that. I can give you the number if you want, not me.
No, it's all good. I was totally kidding. But yeah, I just think it's interesting to see some of these applications, especially in these larger companies, they're starting to make these moves. And I'm wondering, some of the, airlines, they don't really have a reputation for, being behind the times. I talk to people who work for insurance companies or banks or something like that. And it's like, yeah, we know we have to get off the mainframe, right? We have to get off of the 1990 something, machine, and we just don't know how we're going to do it. And so it doesn't sound like that's what you're running into. I am a little curious on on more modern apps. Let's say that I've written an application, I've been hosting it on virtual machine in the cloud, but it's a stand-in for a traditional server, right? I'm not using Kubernetes, I'm not using containers, I'm not using some of these cloud services. It's all, I installed Postgres, I installed, Ruby on Rails or Express, and and it all just runs there. How do I need to start thinking about things to make this transition for my company?
I think that we, at Delta as a company, the reason we made the transition is because we had a very long value stream. So you talked about VM installing the middleware in order to be able to support your application. The process for an application team to do just that was months at Delta. So our whole kind of start to this was, how do we condense that time and make it easier for our developers to get to production? So I think that, in a small scale, if you can do it yourself and you don't have a large amount of applications, run it on a VM, make it you. But for Delta, we have to have a common governance strategy, and it has to be able to be adopted by the masses. And for us, Kubernetes was the way, because we could containerize things, pretty much allow the developers to manage, networking, manage essentially infrastructure in a controlled way via the platform as a service. So it made sense for us, and we wanted to empower the developer. So if you're already empowered, hey, great. But we wanted to kind of have a controlled empowerment, and the platform as a service has enabled us to do that. Yeah.
So we're at GitLab Commit, and I'm a little curious, how has GitLab played into this whole process?
Yeah. So GitLab was the first company that we partnered with on our tooling journey about 2.5 years ago for version control. Previous to GitLab, we had Rational Clearcase. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but it's a very legacy kind of networked version control, server client server postured version control. And we also had a homegrown release engineering tool. So we had to get new tools to go on this journey, absolutely. And GitLab was the first one that we partnered with. Right now, we're only using them for version control, but based off this conference and conversations that we're having, we're going to start looking into leveraging GitLab CI as a secondary offering for our development community, because it's low barrier to entry. You get a YAML file and you're gone. You know what I mean? So we're wanting to provide multiple tracks for teams. So that way they're not just doing things on their own. You have options now, and maybe your application is running in an OpenShift, but you can leverage GitLab CI or Jenkins for it. So we want to provide options. And I think that as we go on that journey, GitLab is, in the community are going to be able to support us. So it's really, really good.
Awesome. Now, if people want to follow this journey for Delta, or maybe they want to see what you're working on or thinking about or writing about or whatever, is there a good place to go find that information?
Yeah. So I'm not on Twitter, and I've gotten crap about that all day. I know. So I might have to make one after this conference, but I am on LinkedIn, Jasmine James, jasmine.l.james if you're looking. And yeah, I like to share my thoughts, share articles, best practices, and connect with people that are doing the same thing so that we all don't have to go through the same BS.
And what's your official title or job description at Delta?
So I am the manager of the DevOps Center of Excellence. The E, it's called a COE, but it's excellence, enablement, those two things. We just pretty much make the developers happy by enabling through tooling and DevOps practices. That's it.
Very cool. Well, I'm going to encourage people to go check out your talk. I would also like to invite you to come on our Adventures in DevOps podcast. And I'm sure they're going to have better and more educated questions than I will. But, yeah. But thanks for coming and talking to me.
Thank you for having me.
Bandwidth for this segment is provided by CacheFly, the world's fastest CDN. Deliver your content fast with CacheFly. Visit CACHEFLY.com to learn more.